March 3, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The desert wind howled across the jagged ridges of North Africa, carrying with it the acrid stench of fuel, dust, and cordite. The Afrika Korps had seen nearly every kind of Allied machine: lumbering British Matildas, clumsy American Grants, even the temperamental Shermans. But this was something else. From behind a low ridge, Obergefreiter Hans Reiter peered through his Zeiss field glasses. What he saw defied everything he understood about warfare. Small, boxy vehicles, barely the height of a man, darted across the dunes with impossible speed. They weren't armored, they weren't heavy, and yet, somehow, they were everywhere. "Was ist das?" muttered his commander, Lieutenant Karl Voss, adjusting his goggles. Reiter shrugged, bewildered. Too small for tanks, too fast for trucks. The strange vehicles bounded over rocky ground that immobilized half-tracks and bogged down even the mighty Panzer IVs. They slipped through wadis, skirted minefields, and appeared behind German positions like phantoms. Each carried a pair of grinning Americans, dust-caked, goggles on, bandanas whipping in the wind. The German troops, accustomed to machines of brute strength, watched in disbelief as these nimble contraptions pulled wounded men to safety, hauled ammunition through ravines, and even dragged field guns into position where tanks dared not go. The Allies had unleashed a new kind of weapon, not built for destruction, but for movement. As dusk fell, the sound of engines echoed across the valley, not the heavy growl of a Panzer, but the high, eager hum of a Willys MB Jeep. One after another, they rolled in, lightweight, unarmored, unstoppable. In the swirling dust, the legend was born. April 12th, 1943, somewhere west of Gafsa, Tunisia. The convoy had been moving for hours, kicking up plumes of red sand that shimmered beneath the desert sun. Sergeant Jack Red Malloy gripped the wheel of his Willys MB, his left boot resting lazily on the dash as the little vehicle bounded over another dune. The Jeep wasn't comfortable, but that didn't matter. It moved. It endured. "Feels like she's got a mind of her own," Corporal Dean Harris shouted over the wind. "Can't believe this thing was built in Ohio." Malloy grinned, squinting into the horizon. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kansas, you name it. They're cranking these babies out faster than the Krauts can shoot at them. And it was true. Across the Atlantic, America's factories, Ford, Willys Overland, and Bantam, were producing Jeeps by the thousands. The specifications had been simple: lightweight, all-terrain, four-wheel drive, and tough enough to take a beating. What rolled off those assembly lines was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of American ingenuity distilled into steel and rubber. German intelligence reports referred to it dismissively as ein leichter Geländewagen, a light terrain car. But soon, they realized it was no laughing matter. At dawn the next day, Reiter and his squad watched as a column of Jeeps raced across an escarpment, zigzagging through a mine-strewn valley where half-tracks had been abandoned. The American vehicles moved like water, flowing through every crack and dip of the terrain. Behind them came infantry, fast, mobile, fearless. Reiter's radio crackled. "Achtung! Feindfahrzeuge im Südsektor, kleine Autos." Small cars. Voss smirked grimly. If that's what they call them, God help us when the big ones come. But the small cars didn't need armor to win battles. They carried radios, medics, machine guns, and commanders. They linked broken lines and kept supplies flowing through chaos. When the Panzers were bogged in sand or mud, the Jeeps simply drove around them, laughing at the rules of terrain. By May, after the collapse of the Axis in North Africa, The Americans had proven something that would haunt the German command for the rest of the war. Mobility could outfight might. And the Jeep had just begun its journey. June 7th, 1944. Normandy, France, Depot 1. The beaches still smoldered. Wrecked landing craft jutted from the surf like broken bones, and the cries of the wounded mingled with the ceaseless thunder of the sea. Amid the chaos, a new sound began to rise. Higher pitched, mechanical, determined. Engines. Dozens of them. From the landing ships, their tires slick with salt water, the Willys MB Jeeps rolled ashore. Their olive-drab bodies gleamed under the gray dawn. Drivers gunned the throttles, water spraying from the wheel wells as they stormed through shallow craters and churned up the sand. "Go, go, go!" shouted Lieutenant Frank Greeley of the 101st Airborne, waving his men forward. A jeep loaded with ammunition roared past, weaving between craters that would have stopped any tank cold. Behind it, another carried stretchers, a Red Cross flag whipping in the wind. The jeeps became lifelines on the blood-soaked beach, ferrying messages, wounded soldiers, and supplies under fire. German machine gun nests opened up from the cliffs. Bullets ripped through the air, pinging off jeep frames, shattering glass. But the drivers didn't stop. They couldn't. The lightweight frames made them hard targets. The speed made them ghosts. Within minutes, jeeps were darting through hedgerows, carrying commanders to newly secured positions. From his bunker overlooking Omaha Beach, Oberst Hermann Kruger lowered his binoculars. He'd expected to see tanks, slow, lumbering, easy to hit. Instead, the enemy seemed to have multiplied into a swarm of agile, untouchable machines. "Sie fahren überall," he muttered. "They drive everywhere." In the days that followed, German units reported strange encounters in the countryside. Where their half-tracks became trapped in mud, jeeps slipped through with ease. Where motorbikes failed in the thick bulkage, the Americans' little four-wheeled demons climbed embankments, plowed through streams, and even carried artillery spotters deep behind enemy lines. A captured German officer, when interrogated, described his disbelief. "We thought they were toys until they passed us in the night, headlights off, silent but for their engines. They were not machines. They were mosquitoes, everywhere biting, never dying." By the time the Allies reached St. Lo, the Jeep had become more than transport. It was an extension of the soldier. Radios bolted to dashboards, 30 caliber Brownings mounted on pintle posts, medical gear stacked high behind the seats. Each one became a miniature war machine, tailored by necessity and imagination. As the rains came, turning roads into rivers, tanks once again sank into the mire. But the jeeps just kept moving. Wheels spinning, engines howling, drivers cursing and laughing through the mud. War, they realized, no longer belonged to the heaviest armor. It belonged to whoever could move first. December 18th, 1944. The Ardennes, Belgium. The forest was alive with echoes of war. Snow drifted down through the black skeletons of trees as German Tiger tanks rumbled across frozen roads, their treads cracking the ice like thunder. The Battle of the Bulge had begun, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied line and crush the advance into Germany. In the white silence between bombardments, the faint whine of smaller engines cut through the cold. From the tree line, a column of jeeps emerged. Mufflers wrapped in rags, headlights hooded, tires fitted with makeshift chains. They looked fragile beside the hulking Tigers, yet they moved with purpose and precision. Sergeant Malloy was there again, his gloved hands stiff around the wheel. "Keep her steady," he muttered, eyes squinting through the flurries. "Those cats can't turn in this muck. We can." Ahead, a Panzer VI Tiger lay wedged in a snowbank, its turret frozen in place. The German crew worked frantically, swearing in the cold, as the Americans' jeeps snaked through the forest behind them, unseen, unstoppable. Malloy's convoy was carrying supplies to a surrounded paratrooper unit near Bastogne. The route was suicidal. Mines, ambushes, blizzards. Yet the jeeps pressed on, carrying crates of ammunition and food strapped across their hoods. When artillery struck near the road, they simply bounced off into the woods, cutting their own paths through drifts and ditches. Behind enemy lines, German soldiers began to talk in whispers of die kleinen Teufelwagen, the little devil cars. They seemed impervious to terrain, immune to weather, impossible to stop. They'd appear from nowhere, guns barking, then vanish back into the white wilderness. Lieutenant Karl Voss, the same officer who'd first seen the jeep in North Africa, now found himself defending a crossroads near Houffalize. His Tiger had thrown a track in the snow, leaving him stranded. Through the blizzard, he spotted movement. 4, maybe 5 small silhouettes weaving between the trees. He raised his field glasses. Unmöglich, he breathed. They were jeeps, again. One slid across the ice, another climbed a roadside embankment with ease. A third carrying men in white camo hauling a radio antenna. They weren't armored, but they were everywhere. Coordinating artillery, scouting ahead, guiding Shermans through hidden paths. Voss lowered the glasses and exhaled in disbelief. All our steel, he said quietly, and they win with tin and tires. By nightfall, the jeeps had linked isolated American positions, ferrying messages that would turn the tide of the battle. Their mobility shattered the German momentum, keeping the defense alive until reinforcements arrived. When the snow cleared, the roads of the Ardennes were littered with wrecked tanks, and between them, the tire tracks of the vehicles that had outlasted them all. April 20th, 1945, near Nuremberg, Germany. Spring had returned to Europe, but it brought no peace. Only the last convulsions of a dying empire. Smoke hung over the ruins of Nuremberg as Allied columns advanced through streets littered with the wreckage of the Third Reich. Between the Sherman tanks and half-tracks, the familiar hum of the jeep filled the air once again. Sergeant Malloy's Willys bounced over cobblestones cracked by shell fire. The city stank of gunpowder and despair. Civilians emerged cautiously from cellars, their eyes hollow, as American soldiers tossed them rations from the backs of passing jeeps. "Hard to believe it's almost over," muttered Corporal Harris, slumped in the passenger seat. Malloy gave a tired grin. "Over? Not till this thing runs out of gas, kid." Their jeep was no longer the clean, sharp-edged machine that rolled off the assembly line. It was dented, oil-streaked. The windshield cracked in 3 places. A veteran in its own right. But it still ran. It always ran. The jeeps were now everywhere, ferrying generals through captured cities, towing artillery, hauling prisoners, even serving as makeshift ambulances. Eisenhower himself traveled in one, standing tall in the back as the Allies pushed through Germany. The little vehicle had become the chariot of victory, a 4-wheeled testament to the industrial might and creativity of a nation half a world away. To the Germans who watched them roll past, the contrast was staggering. Their mighty Panzers lay rusting in fields, their engines choked by mud and lack of fuel. Yet these small, unarmored American machines moved with relentless energy, darting from street to street, tireless and defiant. Near the Danube, a group of surrendered Wehrmacht soldiers stood by the roadside as a jeep convoy passed. One of them, a weary Feldwebel named Heinrich Bauer, turned to his comrade and shook his head. "We built monsters," he said quietly. "They built tools. And that's why we lost." By May, as the war in Europe drew to its final days, the jeep had carried Allied troops through deserts, forests, mountains, and shattered cities. Over 600,000 had been produced, each stamped with a serial number, each a piece of history on wheels. When the surrender came, the Jeeps rolled into Berlin not as conquerors, but as survivors. Soldiers leaned on their hoods, smoking in silence, watching a world reborn. For years to come, those same vehicles would plow through the rubble of post-war Europe, bringing supplies, rebuilding roads, carrying hope where tanks had once brought terror. And for those who had seen them first, in the blinding sun of Kasserine, the mud of Normandy, or the snow of the Ardennes, the memory of that sound, that unstoppable engine, would never fade. The Germans had learned the hard truth. Sometimes, victory doesn't ride in on steel and armor. It drives in on 4 simple wheels. Post-war, 1946. A depot outside Frankfurt, Germany. Rows upon rows of Jeeps sat under the pale morning light, their olive paint chipped, their tires worn smooth from years of war. Mechanics tuned engines, soldiers leaned on fenders, and somewhere a radio played a slow swing tune, the sound of peace after years of thunder. Some of these Jeeps would be shipped home, others sold to civilians, and many left behind to rebuild what the war had broken. They became tractors, taxis, ambulances, and mail carriers. A new kind of hero for a world learning to live again. The Willys MB Jeep had changed everything. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was proof that ingenuity, courage, and adaptability could overcome even the most armored obstacles. Where tanks had faltered, where horses had vanished, the Jeep had carried men toward victory and home. As veterans returned to America, they carried stories of mud, fire, and laughter on impossible roads. And each time they heard that engine's growl, they remembered the feeling of freedom that came with it. "You never forget your first Jeep," one GI wrote home. "It was ugly, loud, and perfect." The world moved on, but the legend never died. Every modern 4x4, every off-road adventure, every dusty trail still echoes with the heartbeat of the Willys. From the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Europe and into history, the Jeep remains the machine that proved mobility wins wars. If you love stories like this, real moments, real machines, and the untold courage of the people behind them, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Join our growing community of WWII enthusiasts who keep history alive, one story at a time. Because the war may be over, but the stories never stop rolling. Subscribe now and ride with us into the next untold chapter of history.